All right, and let's see. Share this. It's there. I want to hit present. All right, so good evening. We're going to go through the budget that we proposed for 21-22 for the Berlin Central School District. And as we go through this budget, I'll explain some of the rationale behind what we've done, as well as where we are finally in terms of our tax levy and the programs that we have going into next year and so on. All right, so first off, there are some points to note, which are very important when we consider the budget as to why we created the budget that we did. The first is, it is our goal that the current proposal will maintain all the current programs that we have in place and also grow support for our students. So we are maintaining all our academic, co-curricular and extracurricular programs. We will also grow some of our supports for our students. We are looking at hiring a social worker to meet the social emotional needs of our students due to pandemic. So that'll be an increase of a social worker. We are also hiring a reading specialist at the elementary school, and that is again designed to help close the learning loss. So our focus is to help students in terms of preventing the learning loss, as well as helping students to overcome any things that happen due to the social emotional impact of the pandemic. So we are looking at that. So the current proposal, one of the main goals for us was maintain our programs as well as grow programs to meet student needs for next year. So this is what I was referring to, social worker and a reading specialist. We are looking forward to them joining our faculty and helping our students in the coming year. We're also running multiple summer programs. So we're running summer program at the high school, at the middle school. We're running an ESY program for our students with special needs. We're also running a program at Berlin Elementary School. So we are running multiple summer programs. The goal of all these summer programs, again, is to help our students recover any learning loss due to COVID, and also to prepare them for the next year. So it is a very much of an enrichment summer program that we're looking to run across all grade levels. This budget also takes into account the funding that has come from the federal government, the American Rescue Plan, as well as the CSSRA, the COVID rescue. So it does take certain amounts of money from that rescue that had come to us from the federal government, and that is part of the budget that we're proposing in order to help us meet the needs of our students. We have taken a conservative approach to the budget, and by that what I mean is that we first identified student needs as to what do we need to make sure our students have going into the next school year in terms of academics, co-curricular and extracurricular. From that, we built back to what is the budget that will help to support the needs of our students. And we made sure that we were conservative in terms of looking at our funding sources as well as our expenses. We realized that the American Rescue Plan is a one-shot deal. We're not going to get this again. And so therefore we have to be careful in how much we spend this year and also into the going years. So that is something we kept in mind as well. Looking at the legislative budget, there are a couple of things to keep in mind, and I will go over them in the next slide. Some of the most important thing is to keep in mind is if you look at the very bottom where it says 2020-21, and then for 21-22, there is a change. And this is due to the American Rescue Plan and the CRRSA. So that has caused an increase of $1.9 million total in what is possible for us. going from last year to this year in terms of the legislative budget. But please keep in mind that this is a one-shot deal. It is not year-to-year sustainable. So a couple of things to keep in mind when we look at the state aid budget basics. I'll let someone in. There we go. So the legislative budget shows an increase in actual aid of almost $1 million or 11.27%. That is something to keep in mind. And the governor's pandemic adjustment decrease of $670,000 was removed, and then subsequent CARES Act federal reimbursement was removed. So in other words, we saw this money go away, but it was then replaced by the federal aid that we're getting as well. So in a way, it was a wash, but it's important to note that there was some decrease and increase of money happening at the state level because of the federal aid that came in for the school districts. Our total allocation of the CRRSA is around $670,000. The American Rescue Plan is $1.75 million, but we have to be careful how we use this money because it is a one-shot deal. We have to use a minimum of 12.5% every year, and we have to use the money in 4 years. Otherwise, it's gone. So we have to be careful in how we allocate it. We expect that the impact of COVID is going to continue for years to come in terms of making sure that students' learning loss is addressed as well as their social emotional needs are met. So we have to be careful that we don't use up all the ARP money this year itself. And that is something we're going to be cognizant of. So we need to take at least 12.5% of the ARP, which is around $218,766. And that is something which you will see later on in our slides too. The miscellaneous revenue is pretty much consistent. For example, the distance learning reimbursement, right around 40,000. Medicare Part D, right around 15,000. So they stayed pretty consistent. There wasn't too much changing when you look at our miscellaneous revenue. Just something to notice, it is projected to increase by $46,000. So there's a minimal increase which will take place in our miscellaneous revenues, little over $46,000. So it's not going to be a bulk of the increase that we will be getting in terms of the American Rescue Plan and so on. For the tax cap calculation, there are two things I'd like to point out. The first is exclusions. So we have tax levy limit with and without exclusions, and that's something else I will go over as well. Berlin School District is able to use a lot of exclusions this year. And when we use exclusions up to the limit, we do not need a supermajority in order for it to be a successful vote. When we look at how much is allowed, we're allowed to go up to 1.04% if we don't use any exclusions. And if we do use exclusions, it is 4.47%. So that's the range that we have in which we can go with a tax levy without needing a supermajority. Now, we were cognizant of the fact that the pandemic has had an impact on the community. It has had an impact on the economy locally as well as statewide and nationwide. And keeping that in mind, based on the advice of the board, we were able to bring the tax levy down to a very modest, less than 2% tax levy. We're at 1.99%. So even though we could have gone all the way up to 4.47%, we did not do that. We were cognizant of the needs of the community. We respect that. And we came with 1.99% for a tax levy, which is at par or below some of the levies in prior years as well. So a couple of basics for the tax cap. The first is just a definition of how the exclusions come about. So the state aid is deducted from the expenditures that we have, and the net amount is the exemption. If it is negative, then there is no exclusion. If it is positive, then we do get exclusion. So it varies from year to year depending on how much state aid we're getting and how much expenditures do we have. So that varies from year to year. This year, we were eligible for a lot. That's why we were able to go up to 4.47%, which we did not. So the maximum allowable tax cap increase without exclusions, 1.04%, and with exclusions, 4.48%. And we recommended a modest use of exclusions, and that is what we are going to go with. So here's the budgeted revenue. If you look at the last line, which says the total from $21.897 million to $23.840 million, we have an increase of $1.943 million, which is a budget to budget increase. That is also taking into account that our appropriated fund balance, we're going to increase it a little bit from 500 to 700,000 because of anticipated COVID expenses that may come up next year, as well as a decrease in state aid. So those are two factors which we know are going to happen, and we have to fiscally plan for those two as well. When we look at state aid, that has gone up a little bit by 11.34%. But again, keep in mind the rescue plan, which is a one-shot deal, and also the CRRSA. And then when we look at the local tax levy, I'm going to minimize this. So I'll minimize this a little. There we go. So now we can see that the local tax levy, we have kept it below 2%, 1.99%, to keep in line with tax levies or below tax levies from prior years. And so these are the important points that I wanted to point out in this slide. When we look at our revenue, the state aid did increase budget to budget by 11.34%. That's what's shown in the slide. And there were small miscellaneous revenue increases, little over $46,000. We did increase our appropriated fund balance by $200,000. And the reason for that is we know that we are going to have a shortfall in state aid for next year because we didn't have as many expenses which are state aidable this year, as well as we're going to have continuing COVID expenses for next year. So we have to make sure we can meet those expenses. And then finally, we're using the modest tax levy increase of just $194,229 or 1.99%. We do want to emphasize this is on par or below the tax levy increases in prior years. And that is something that we did want to make sure we were able to achieve for the community. The budget to budget increase includes the federal stimulus, the American Rescue Plan, increase of $1.943 million or 8.87%. So this is why it is such a big increase, because we are seeing the federal stimulus money coming in. But again, it is not year to year, it is a one-shot deal, and we have to keep that in mind. Other budget considerations that we have to make sure, we have contracts under negotiation, so there are contractual obligations which are still pending. The outcome of those negotiations. We have additional expenses for new buildings and fields. We just constructed a new BMF facility, as well as we have the fields for the students. The soccer field, we have to make sure that we maintain those fields. So there will be additional expenses over prior years for those. Continued COVID-19 expenses. We're hoping these start to decline, but we are preparing that if they do not decline, we can meet those expenses. Health insurance increases happen every year. So this is something that the board and community need to keep in mind. And then academic changes. I do want to emphasize this a little bit because we are making gains in student academics and we want to keep pushing that. So we are coming up with a new math program at Berlin Elementary School, which is going to cost us some money in the first year as we implement it, and then it will be in place. So it is a one-time expense for a new math program at the elementary school. We also have a new reading program, and we will be providing training to our teachers in the new math and the new reading program. So the training expenses are also rolled into this. We want to make sure our teachers are prepared for this. We're also looking at the intervention programs that we have, as well as the diagnostic programs at the middle and high school. And we will go with some other programs than what we have in place right now, because we want programs that are more responsive to student needs. So when I say academic changes, it is multiple things happening at both the buildings, because we really want to target academics for students and make it more productive for them when they're in our schools. And then the last point was debt service payments, which happens year to year. So those are also things to keep in mind for the budget. So at this time, let me open up everyone. And if there are any questions, Karen and I are both here. If there are any questions regarding the budget, we would love to be able to answer them for you. Okay. Going once. So again, if you have questions that come up later on, we will be happy to take questions as well. But if there are no questions at this time regarding the budget hearing, I want to thank everyone who's attended and been a part of this. We're really proud that we're able to sustain and grow our programs at Berlin while keeping our tax levy at an amount which is similar to prior years, even in the midst of a pandemic. And we look forward to continue serving our students for next school year. Thank you everyone for being here.